Mid-1920s, great days for America. There were flappers and freedom, bootleg booze and bathtub gin, peace and prosperity. The mid-20s were boom times. They were years of advancement, faster cars, faster planes, sound on the silver screen, and radio in almost every home. A stock market heading for the sky. Such was America in those boisterous years. But along with that, there were gangsters and gang wars, and bigotry and injustice, and the seeds of economic disaster just beneath the glittering surface. I'm E.G. Marshall. Let's relive together the sights and sounds of America in the years before the storm, here on the American Diary. The America of the mid-1920s was in a state of change, in manners and in customs. Many had come out of the war feeling that the old Puritan code of morals was unrealistic at best, and there was widespread rebellion among the younger generation, especially the college crowd. It was have your fun whenever and wherever you find it, 23 skidoo, and oh you kid. A rickety open car and a silver flask. These were basic requirements for big men on campus and willing co-eds alike. The automobile gave easy escape from the eyes of both parents and teachers, and alcohol further weakened inhibitions already battered by the loosening of restraints following World War I. For many, the law and old-fashioned morals was something to be scoffed at. Liquor was illegal, but for millions of people, prohibition was a denial of rights. Although nightclubs were illegal, they were usually crowded. If the doorman didn't recognize you, a simple "Joe sent me" would often get you in. By the mid-20s, bootlegging was a $2 billion a year industry, employing 500,000 people. It was a symbol of the times. But the epitome of the 20s was the flapper doing the Charleston. Short dresses and rolled stockings, bobbed hair, brash language, and wild, sexy dancing. With the disappearance of old Victorian restrictions, the bathing beauty contest became a true American institution. In modern times, the bathing suits worn by the ladies would be pretty tame, to say the least, but they did clearly reveal a girl's endowments. By the standards of the day, they were daringly risque, and the display of feminine charms was greatly enjoyed. Hair was bobbed to imitate French ladies of easy virtue who had entertained American doughboys in World War I. Here, in all her glory, was the American beauty, fairest flower in the land. In ladies' fashions of the 20s, fashions for the sophisticated, high-living society ladies, that is, there were all the hallmarks of luxury and glamour and gaudy affluence. Designers of exotic headdresses went to any length to outdo each other with beads and sequins and feathers. Their goal was to make any woman who wore their creations feel she was a bird of paradise, as glittering and sexy as any siren of the silver screen. The shy, shrinking violet of yesterday was definitely passé. A slender, boyish figure was the ambition of every woman, and dresses became short and chic to accommodate the natural look. Materials became lighter as the vogue turned to silk and rayon, and sexy lingerie. It was such garb that mirrored the mood of the times. In Washington, however, the business of America was business, to quote Calvin Coolidge, 29th President of the United States, a painfully bashful country lawyer from New England. Silent Cal took long, happy vacations on his New England farm, preferring homely pastimes to the affairs of state, and it was claimed by some that he spent more time doing chores than doing the business of government. After a morning doing the chores, he liked to pull down the blinds and snooze away the lazy afternoons. "Can't hang you for what you don't say," Silent Cal once said. There were many who attributed the nation's prosperity to Coolidge and his philosophy, but Coolidge and his supporters failed to see signs of crisis ahead in the crystal ball of the future. On the screen, horror films were all the rage, and Lon Chaney's Phantom of the Opera was a smash hit in 1925. Mary Philbin, as Christine, an aspiring young singer, comes upon the Phantom, who adores her but has never let her see his face. Christine does not know that the Phantom is so grotesque in appearance that he must live in the catacombs beneath the Paris Opera House. She only knows that she has found the figure behind the unseen voice who has coached her and promised her stardom. The sequence of scenes that follows is a classic example of the horror film at its best. Lon Chaney's corroded, living skull suddenly turned to the audience. Strong men shuddered, and women fainted. They were terrified, but they loved it. The Ziegfeld Follies, the Great White Way on opening night.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Norman Brokenshire with the Columbia Broadcasting System. Tonight we're broadcasting the gala opening of Florence Ziegfeld's greatest show.
In this clip from one of the first sound films, announcer Norman Brokenshire combines radio, talkies, and theater to introduce celebrities and the glamour of Broadway.
He's with his wife, Billy Burke. There's Noah Berry. Oh, he's hiding behind the whiskers. Here comes Adolph Zukor, the president of Paramount Pictures. Oh, here's another marvelous writer, Ring Lardner. You know him, Al. Oh, here comes a big shot. Here comes a big shot. A banker, philanthropist, art patron. I want you to see Otto Kahn. Oh, and here's Texas Guinan. Here's Texas Guinan. Tonight, she's a sucker. He's paying $25 for it. Oh, and here comes Mrs. Walker and her husband, Mayor Jimmy Walker. Hurry up, Jimmy. Hurry up, Jimmy. You'll be late again.
The great heartthrob of the 20s was the vagabond lover, crooner Rudy Vallee. who sang through his nose and hypnotized women wherever he played. With his own band, the Connecticut Yankees, and his greeting of "Hi-ho, everybody," Valet made the radio variety show a national pastime. Listen as he sings his most famous song. Movies and radio had at last come of age. Network broadcasting began in 1924, and talking pictures took over in 1927 with The Jazz Singer, starring Al Jolson. Millions of Americans who had neither tasted bathtub gin nor seen a Broadway show could now share, vicariously at least, the excitement of the roaring 20s. It was 1927 when these prophetic words were written. The airplane has now advanced to the stage where the demands of commerce are sufficient to warrant the building of planes without regard to military usefulness. Undoubtedly, in a few years, the United States will be covered with a network of passenger, mail, and express lines. As a young boy in St. Paul, Minnesota, I heard Lucky Lindy say those words when he returned in triumph from Paris. And he, Lindbergh, as much as anyone, proved them true. The age of commercial aviation did arrive in the 20s. And in typical American fashion, it was accompanied by ballyhoo and publicity. In one of the wackier bits of business, the United States Post Office airmailed a woman. To make sure there would be no postage due on arrival, an official, keeping as straight a face as he could, meticulously canceled every stamp on Miss Virginia Brissak's helmet before she was loaded aboard. It was a PR stunt, of course, but it was supposed to drive home the point that Americans could send almost anything, almost anywhere, by airmail parcel post. Aviation was being promoted every way possible, and flying circuses became popular entertainment. There was the usual hoopla and clowning on the ground, but it was the planes and the pilots who flung them about the sky that brought out the crowds. America was falling in love with the airplane, just as it had with the automobile. And the exhibitions of daring and flying skill thrilled people as nothing ever had before. Even so, it took the offer of a prize for the first non-stop flight between New York and Paris to break things wide open. Lieutenant Commander Richard E. Byrd, who would later fly over both poles, went belly up while testing the plane he planned to enter, and had to withdraw because of injuries. The French flying ace Paul René Fonck made a bid for the prize, but he met with disaster in New Jersey. The American entry was a young flyer named Charles A. Lindbergh. His small plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, was ready on May 20th, 1927. His ground crew poured in the last of 425 gallons of gasoline. And in the early morning, Lucky Lindy, as the press had dubbed him, climbed aboard to begin his flight. With the Spirit of St. Louis loaded with every ounce of fuel it could carry, Lindbergh knew the takeoff could be the most dangerous part of the flight, and it almost was. But at last, Charles Lindbergh was on his way. "33.5 hours later, Lindbergh arrived at Le Bourget airfield in Paris. The New York Times said, quote, At 10:24, the Spirit of St. Louis landed, and lines of soldiers, ranks of policemen, and stout steel fences went down before a mad rush as irresistible as the tides of the ocean. France and the world had taken the Lone Eagle to its heart. Lindbergh captivated everyone he met at welcoming ceremonies, including American Ambassador Herrick and French President Lindbergh, who awarded him highest honors. At Cherbourg, the Navy took Lindbergh aboard the U.S. cruiser Memphis for a VIP journey home. The dirigible Los Angeles led a fleet of airships and surface craft that swarmed out to meet the Memphis as it neared the shore, and Lucky Lindy's homecoming celebrations began. For the next few weeks, mass excitement and enthusiasm swept the country. Nothing seemed to matter but Lindy and his incredible story of fortitude and courage. In Washington, Lindbergh was commissioned colonel, and President Coolidge himself pinned the Distinguished Flying Cross on his chest. In New York, hundreds of boats jammed the harbor to start a hero's welcome that practically turned the city upside down. As the triumphal parade moved slowly down Fifth Avenue, New Yorkers showered Lindy with 1,800 tons of ticker tape and torn paper, an avalanche compared to the mere 155 tons in the Armistice Day celebration of 1918. The idolization of Lindbergh was unprecedented, but there was a simple explanation. The American people needed him to buttress their faith. They were growing disillusioned with phony heroes and scandal and crime. Suddenly, here was a modern Galahad, modesty, chivalry, and dedication all embodied in one man. Here was a son everyone could be proud of. In 1929, the prophecy of cross-country air service made by Lindbergh became a reality, and he joined the board of directors of Transcontinental Air Transport, a corporate ancestor of Trans World Airlines. In collaboration with the Pennsylvania Railroad, TAT offered a coast-to-coast journey to begin by rail and end by air, a new concept in travel. From New York, passengers went by train to Columbus, Ohio. There, baggage was weighed and transferred, and passengers were given their airline boarding passes. For the passengers, it was hard to believe the promise that only 48 hours after leaving New York, they would be in Los Angeles. But to those aboard, this was the beginning of what would be a fascinating odyssey, filled with new sights and new experiences. What a thrill it was to watch the miles roll by as if in slow motion, while those still earthbound fell behind. progress of TAT's inaugural coast-to-coast flight was followed closely. And as it touched down in Indianapolis, the first step toward fast transcontinental travel had been taken. The stop at Indianapolis was brief while the plane was serviced. Then it was back on board to head for Kansas City, Topeka, and points west.
Westbound plane calling radio ground station at Wichita.
TAT Maddox, radio ground station at Wichita, answering westbound.
At one point in the flight, the second officer announced a surprise for the passengers. He told them that Lindbergh himself, TAT's technical supervisor, had been following their progress, and if they wanted proof, they need only look out the window. There he was, the lone eagle flying wing to wing. The rest of the flight would seem almost anticlimactic. Los Angeles, California, the last stop on the line. The flight had arrived exactly on time, and the miracle of modern air transport was now a full-fledged reality.
Plane from New York and the east, arriving 4:20 on time.
The dawn of modern air transport was an inspiration to America. And it's well to remember that despite the excesses and the occasional outrages of the Roaring Twenties, most Americans still wholeheartedly believed in their country and its future. There were still millions of citizens who didn't glorify the bootlegger and the get-rich-quick schemes, but called upon their own strengths to get them through. They would be needed, for the storm clouds were gathering